Page 143. We're looking out from the crack of the old tree where the big black dog was scratching. Henrietta sat still for a moment, silent. Henry sat still, wondering what to think. "Let's look in Endor," Henrietta said. "What?" "The black door. Let's look through that one now." Henrietta shook his head. "I don't want to. I'll be sick again." "No, you won't," Henrietta said. "You didn't dream anything bad about the door, did you? Oh, we should clean up where you threw up. I don't want to slip on the towel in the dark." "I already did," Henry said. When you were in the barn, but I plugged up the toilet with the paper towels." "Did it overflow?" "Not while I was in there," Henrietta laughed. "You just left it?" "Yeah. There's a plunger right beside the toilet. Let's look through the black door." "I don't want to." "Well, then go sit outside in the attic and I'll look." Henrietta slid toward the wall. "Or go down and plunge the toilet. You're being worse than Penny. She's never curious." Henry stood up. He didn't say anything. Everything, page 144, he wanted to say would sound childish. He knew he was afraid of the black door, and he thought that he should be, but he was embarrassed that he had thrown up, and Henrietta made him feel stupid. So he opened up his bedroom doors, stepped out with only a slightly offended grunt, and went to plunge the toilet. He shut the doors behind him, hoping that Henrietta might feel a little afraid in the dark. Henry had never used a plunger before. Of course, there wasn't much that he had used before. He had read about various devices and implements in boring books that his father had given him for birthdays and Christmas, so he knew about the float mechanism in the toilet tank, about the water filtration and the anti-lock brakes. He had read nothing about plungers. The plunger he was using was confusing him. The rubber part was black and somehow kept turning inside out, but Henry wasn't thinking too much about it, and when, after he slopped it around in the toilet bowl a bit, he reached over and flushed the toilet, he hardly noticed how close to overflowing the water came. He was irritated with Henrietta and with himself. Why did he have to throw up just because he was scared? And pass out? And he was angry with Henrietta because she was being stupid. The door was obviously not a good door. More than that, he was angry with himself for leaving her alone to look through a door he was sure was bad. He shouldn't have let her. He was bigger than she was. Suddenly, all the water in the toilet gurgled and slurped its way down. Henry glanced at the toilet and wondered where all the water had gone, and then flushed it again. Without watching to see what would happen, he stuck the plunger back onto his shoulders beside its holder beside the toilet and headed upstairs. He was preoccupied, collecting the words that he would use to explain things to Henrietta, and when his hand touched one of his doors, it was cold. He pulled the doors open quickly and stepped forward into the dark room. His bed was in the way. "Henrietta," he said. Cold in the room sucked at him. His skin tightened and sent up bumps. His stomach knotted and burbled into his throat while his legs tried to collapse. He jumped onto the bed and lunged for his lamp. He knocked it over, but still found the small switch and pushed it. Henrietta was lying on her face between the bed and the wall. Her left arm was up to the shoulder in the black cupboard. Ignoring the pit of nausea in his stomach, Henry jumped to the floor, grabbed her shoulders, and tried to pull her away from the wall. She wouldn't budge. On all fours above Henrietta, he leaned down, and page 146, reached into the cupboard. He swallowed a gag and moved his hand along the chilled skin of her arm. He knew when his hand had passed out of the cupboard because Henrietta's arm went from cold to frozen. His fingers crawled down her arm until they felt like a tight gripping her wrist. His fingers crawled down her arm until they felt a hand gripping her wrist, clenching tight. In a split second, the hand let go of Henrietta and grabbed Henry. Henry yelled, tried to jump, and bent his elbow in the wrong direction in the cupboard. He twisted his hand hard and pulled back. He was jerked against the wall. His head slammed against the knob of another cupboard. Loud words he did not understand poured out the cupboard's mouth, and the cold grew stronger. Henry writhed, lungs full but not exhaling, teeth grinding, body flopping and pulling. Even while he fought, he felt sickness growing inside of him, welling into his chest. He felt the fingers on his wrists slip and quickly reclamp farther up around his forearm and his shirt sleeve. He put both knees up on the wall and pulled back. His sleeve, gripped tight, slid down around his wrist. Henry didn't think about what he did. He had done it before on the playground. He had been made fun of then. He slithered his hand back inside his sleeve. The other hand gripped and then regripped, but Henry was shedding his shirt quickly now. When his arm came free into the body of his shirt, he ducked his head down and pulled out. The whole shirt disappeared into the cupboard, and he fell back onto the floor. Then, before he could pull her hand from the door, Henrietta's body slid closer to the wall. Henry turned, leaned across his bed, grabbed his floppy blade knife off the nightstand. This time, when he dropped to the floor beside Henrietta, he gripped Henrietta's shoulder with his right hand while his left, with thumb firmly holding the knife, slid down her arm. When he thought he was almost to the back of the cupboard, he stopped and took a deep breath. Then he lunged straight through with the knife. The blade bit into something hard like bone, but slipped and folded shut on his own fingers. The other side of the cupboard, something shrieked. Henry felt Henrietta's arm go limp. He dropped the knife, yanked his hand back, and rolled Henrietta away from the wall. He grabbed the black door, shook the gold chain back in, and slapped the door in place. He kicked it tight and sat still with both his feet against it, breathing heavily. Henrietta wasn't stirring. Henry looked at his fingers. 3 of them were leaking blood onto the floor. He shivered, noticing again how cold the room was, especially without his shirt. He wanted to check on Henrietta, page 148. Instead, he sat for a very long time with his feet against the door to Endor. When enough time had passed that he was sure whoever it was couldn't get the door open from the other side, or wasn't going to try, he scooted over to Henrietta. She was almost snoring. He shook her a little. "Henrietta," he said. She turned her head but didn't wake. "Henrietta," he said again, and shook her harder. He glanced up. Blake the cat was sitting on the bed looking at him. His white body was motionless. His ears were up. His gray tail switched. Henry stared back. "Did you see that?" Henry asked. The cat looked at the black door, then jumped down to lick Henrietta's face with his sandpaper tongue. She opened her eyes and tried to sit up. Henry helped her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Henrietta yawned. "Where's your shirt?" "It went through the black cupboard. So I guess it's in Endor, if that's its name." "You shoved it through the cupboard?" "No." "What happened to your hand?" "Do you remember anything?" Henry asked. "You plugged the toilet." "After that." "Oh." Henrietta furrowed her brow and looked around the room. "I looked through the black cupboard. And the flashlight fell through." "The flashlight? You were using a flashlight?" "I taped it onto a yardstick and stuck it through next to the periscope." "Are you stupid?" Henrietta gave him a hard look. "That's not nice." "You are! You're stupid!" Henry stood up and turned around in place. He pointed at her. "You're really, really dumb! Why would you do that?" "Let me think," Henrietta said, glaring. "Oh, right. It was dark on the other side, and I wanted to see. Isn't that why people use flashlights?" Henry couldn't stop moving. "And so you just stuck one into some strange, evil place and it fell through?" "Yes, I did. Because I didn't run away scared, like you. I may be a girl, but you act more like one than I do." Henry grunted. "And it was my favorite," Henrietta said. "So when it fell, I reached in to see if I could find it. Do you think we could fish it back through?" "No!" Henry yelled. "No, no, no!" He jumped. "No!" You don't remember being grabbed? When I came upstairs, you were unconscious, up to your shoulder in the cupboard, face down on the floor. Someone was pulling you, and I had to reach in and stab them with my knife. No. Henrietta smiled and put her eyebrows up. Really? She said. Well, if there's someone on the other side, it's not like they could do anything from in there. It's just a cut on your hand. Now Henry was truly furious. He kicked the wall, he kicked the bed, he looked for something to throw. The cat sat by and watched all of it. Henry almost said a lot of things, but his mouth and mind couldn't find them at the same time. He couldn't speak until he finally slowed down and stood breathing slowly. "You're not allowed in my room," he said. "You're not allowed to look at my cupboards. You're not allowed to open them or talk to me about them. You are not allowed." "It's not like I could open them if I'm not in your room," Henrietta said. She stood up and picked up the cat. "I think you're being silly," she said. She knelt on Henry's bed and waddled across it to the door. Without another word, she walked out of Henry's bedroom and sat down the stairs. Henry flopped onto his bed, and his steam leaked slowly out. He began telling himself a story inside his head. It was about how just and kind and understanding he was. It was about how right he'd been, how necessary his tone and word choice. It was about a girl who just didn't understand, who was completely ignorant. Then, for some reason, the narrator of the story included an incident in which Henry had pushed an envelope into a strange place just to see what would happen. It hadn't even been by accident. The incident did not fit with the rest of the story, so Henry tried to ignore it. He couldn't ignore it, so he tried to explain it. Completely different things. The post office was obviously not dangerous. It was yellow. I just wanted to see what the mailman would do. The flashlight was stupid. I didn't shine a flashlight into the post office. She didn't even act sorry. I would have acted sorry. I always act sorry when people get upset. She didn't even care that I probably saved her life. She didn't know. She was unconscious. Oh, shut up. Henry got to his feet and found a new shirt and told himself to forget about it. When he was walking downstairs, he made himself whistle. Henrietta was sitting at the dining room table eating a sandwich. "Yours is in the fridge," she told him. "Thanks," Henry said, and went to find it. "Want a drink?" he asked from the kitchen. "Sure." Henry came back out and sat down with his sandwich and 2 milks. Page 152. "I'm sorry I was stupid," Henrietta said. She reached up and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, but she didn't look at him. "I'm sorry I said you were stupid," Henry replied. "I didn't mean to knock the flashlight in." Henrietta's voice was quiet. Henry took a bite. It was dumb to even have it. "I said I was sorry," Henrietta muttered. "You would have done it if you hadn't been afraid." Henry began to get angry and stopped himself. "It would have been just as stupid if I'd done it." "And you would have," Henrietta said, finally looking at him. Henry sniffed and spoke slowly. "I did not want to look in the black cupboard." Henrietta stared back down at her plate. "But if you had wanted to, you would have used a flashlight." "But I wouldn't have shoved it through," Henry said. Both of them continued eating. "I'm sorry I was stupid," Henrietta said again. Henry took a deep breath. "Sorry I got mad and said you were stupid." Henrietta pointed. "You should wash the blood off your hand. It's kind of gross, eating like that." Henry shrugged. He hadn't washed for 2 reasons. First, because his fingers didn't hurt that much. and he thought that washing them might. Second, because he felt about 10 years older every time he saw his bloody hand. "We can finish putting all the names on the doors after lunch," Henrietta said. "No," Henry said. Henrietta looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I said I was sorry." Henry stared at his sandwich. "I know, but I still don't want to do this. I don't want something bad to happen, and we're not going to try and open any more." "But I haven't even seen the post office yet," Henry said. "And what about Badon Hill? Those were both good places." Henry thought about this. "Okay," he said. "Tonight you can come to my room and look through the yellow chrysanthemum place, but not till tonight, and I'm in charge." He looked at her. "You have to do what I say, even if you don't want to." It was Henrietta's turn to think. "Okay," she said. "Good," Henry said into his glass. He took a long drink and thumped it back onto the table. "Don't ever open the black cupboard again." Henrietta didn't say anything.